You're pregnant and it's not planned. Today on the Pulling Curls podcast, we're talking about unexpected or unplanned pregnancies. Let's untangle it. Hi, I'm Hilary, a serial overcomplicator. I'm also a nurse, mom to 3, and the curly head behind Pulling Curls and the Pregnancy Nurse. This podcast aims to help us stop overcomplicating things and remember how much easier it is to keep things simple. Let's smooth out those snarls with Pregnancy and Parenting Untangled, the Pulling Curls podcast. This episode of the Pulling Curls podcast is sponsored by the online prenatal class for couples. It is the easy way to get prepared for your upcoming hospital birth. It's quick, can be done in just 3 hours, it's affordable, so much cheaper than a lot of the online birth classes available. And it's meant to be done with your partner to get a teammate rather than just a cheerleader. Come join us today. Today's guest is a licensed master social worker and a certified perinatal mental health professional. She is the CEO of She Might. I want to introduce today's guest, Erin Galloway. Hey, Erin, welcome to the Pulling Curls podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
This was planned, this episode.
It was.
But not all babies are planned.
Yes, that's very true.
So how would you frame, what is an unplanned pregnancy? Because I think all of us think, oh, you're 12. 12 is probably earlier than most people think. But Hilary, I have delivered 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
You're 16. You and your boyfriend just didn't think about a condom. But that is not what we're talking about here today. Although that happens too. And we're here to support all those people.
Yeah. Well, I want to start by saying almost half of the pregnancies in the United States are what you might consider unplanned or unexpected. And that can be regardless of whether you want to be a parent, whether you're already a parent, whether you're in a stable relationship, whether you used birth control or other forms of conception or not. Basically, an unexpected pregnancy can happen to anyone. And so, I'm glad you said what you said, because I think when people hear unexpected or unplanned pregnancy, assumptions are made that this must be someone who's younger or someone in crisis. And that's just not the case. And I think that misconception is becoming less common as you see a lot of stories on social media from people with different backgrounds and experiences who unexpectedly find themselves pregnant in a different season of life. So I think to define that is really an unexpected pregnancy is just that. It's unexpected. That could mean, like I said, you were using contraception and it still happened. You thought you were done having kids. You never imagined having kids at all or not anytime soon. You thought it would take a long time to get pregnant. So you started trying and you didn't really expect it to happen the first time, and you're not emotionally ready in that moment till you didn't expect it. So I think a lot of people expect it to take time because we're hearing more and more that it's taking a year or longer to get pregnant. So these are all real stories I've heard from women we've spoken to. Everyone's experience is so different, but I think there are just so many reasons that a pregnancy might be labeled unexpected.
I want to tell two sides of the stories. First off, we had Danny on the podcast and she talked about how she used a syringe and a semen from a birth bank and did it at home. But even for her, she was super surprised that it worked. So even though she put all this effort into getting pregnant, it still is like, oh my gosh, now I actually am pregnant. And I think that's really valid. And I got to say that as a labor nurse, people who do pregnancy all the time, I had a coworker who was like, oh, my boobs are really hurting today. My period must be coming. And we were like, how late is it? And she was like a week. And we were all like,
yeah,
and then a week later, we were like, you should go take a pregnancy test. And she took one and it was positive. And she and I both had kids that were just entering kindergarten. We were just feeling like, oh, we are getting a little bit of our life back. And she was starting back with a baby. And it was devastating for a while for her. Even as people who do labor and delivery constantly, it was a lot. And it was a lot even up until the baby was born. She didn't feel like she had bonded with her as much. But, a couple months in, she was like, it's exactly the same with the other kids. It just took a while. And I think that's so valid. And I think a lot of people are like, this doesn't happen to people that are smart and think about things like this. We think about pregnancy all the time. That my coworker was a real smart girl. Stuff happens.
Yeah. And I mean, you see stories all the time where it's like you just had your baby and 6 weeks later, or however many weeks later, months later, you find yourself pregnant. There's an OBGYN who's on social media, Dr. Allie, and she got pregnant really soon after she had her baby. And it was unexpected. Now, things happen. Again, you can get pregnant while you're on birth control. So it's never 100% guaranteed. And Yeah, you're right. Like, I think even people who think about pregnancy all the time and think about their family and all of this all the time still can become unexpectedly pregnant. And I think that's hard for people to wrap their minds around. They're like, well, obviously, if you weren't using protection or weren't doing XYZ, you're going to be pregnant. Well, that's not the case for everybody. And yeah, there can be that initial response of overwhelm, especially if you didn't expect it to happen so quick. I mean, I have friends who were like, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's going to take us like 6 months to a year to get pregnant. Well, then it happens and your timeline shifts, right? We're not in control of that.
And we tried for 2 to 3 years to get pregnant with my last baby and number three. And after a while, you're like, well, this probably isn't going to happen. And I was just about ready to turn the baby factory off because, again, I had a kid going to kindergarten and I was like, maybe it's just time to move on with our lives. And got pregnant. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I actually am pregnant now. What am I going to do? And you freak out a little bit. Like, I think so many people have these feelings and then are thinking no one else has these feelings. No one
Yeah.
else ever talks about how you're like, oh, it took me 3 years to get pregnant, but now I'm like freaking out inside that I'm pregnant, even though I was
Yeah.
trying to do this for so long.
Yeah. The reality sets in. Like, I planned both of my pregnancies, they happened pretty quickly. And I think with both, I still had those moments of, okay, life is going to change, especially with the first. I remember I think I was like 3 months pregnant. And I remember calling my sister sobbing because I was like, what did I do? Like, we had, been married a long time and we weren't in the season of life that we wanted kids at that time. And then we decided, okay, this is the time, now or never. I mean, I feel like there's never the right time to have kids. And well, we made that decision. And then it was like, okay, life is changing. What does this look like? Did I actually even think about what this is going to look like? And I think that's totally normal. And we've had clients who come to us and say, yeah, I thought I was ready for this and I feel like I'm not ready. And I think a lot of that is it's totally normal and natural to be like, oh, life is changing, because it is.
I love that you guys run a whole community around this because it's sort of like the unspoken thing about how
Hmm.
so many people have unplanned pregnancies. So many people have very surprise pregnancies. So many people have pregnancies that they feel conflicted about inside.
Hmm.
And people just don't talk about it because
Yeah.
this, like, we're talking about postpartum anxiety and depression, but I think this is an area that we really don't talk about, that people have conflicting feelings about pregnancy. And
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. And, when unexpected pregnancy is a risk factor for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. So those are things people don't know. And we recently had our former director of communications on the podcast to talk about mental health during pregnancy and postpartum. And she shared, like, yeah, that was me. That was I hit all the risk factors for that. And that's why I experienced such significant depression during my pregnancy. And so I think those are just important things to know.
Okay, so what are some feelings, since you have a whole community about this? I'd love that you would be able to, like, a broad spectrum of people. How can that affect your pregnancy? Like, what do people describe moving through pregnancy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can completely shift how you feel about the pregnancy, how you feel about your current life situation, how you feel about your partner. I think there are a lot of emotions that come with that. I think it can start by feeling very conflicted. Maybe you're feeling numb or confused. I mean, we have stress responses for a reason, and we have these responses to pregnancy. So that could look like being numb, feeling confused, feeling very overwhelmed, and not being able to kind of even acknowledge the pregnancy. People feel that they're not excited. And that is really hard for people to overcome. They're like, everybody elsewhere is so excited about everything, but I just don't feel that excited. I think that's okay. I'm not an overly excited person, like with that kind of stuff. And so I almost felt like I feel weird that I'm not like jumping for joy and talking about this constantly. I just felt like I was weird for that. And then even like really not understanding why people aren't excited for them, or maybe there's just a response that they don't get. I think those are unmet expectations that we have when you think, oh, my partner is going to be really excited and they're not, or their initial reaction is not great, or a friend or sister, brother, parent. Like, I think when you get a response that's not exactly what you expected, I think that's hard to process. You could also just feel like you're being knocked off your feet. I think it just stops you in your tracks. So it doesn't matter if you were planning to have kids eventually, never planned to have kids, or didn't plan to have more kids. We see that a lot. That can just stop you, help you pause, and you're like wondering, what is this going to do to my life? Like, how is this going to affect my career? What about my education, financial stability? What does this mean for my other kids? Like, all of these questions come in. And so you're just wondering, like, okay, how is this impacting my relationship? what does this look like for my own identity as a mom, but as an individual? And what changes are going to happen to my independence and what life looks like if I don't have any kids? So I just think there's logistical things that come up in that response of like, what are we going to do with this? But I also think there's just emotional loss that can come up. And I don't think that's acknowledged. And I think for some people, that does mean like grieving some of that.
I want to touch back on grief in a second, but I loved how you mentioned other people's reaction. Because especially, let's say you have a boyfriend that you haven't known very long, and then you tell your
Hmm.
mom that you're pregnant, and she maybe doesn't have the reaction that you're hoping for as a mom of some adult kids. I can totally understand that. They're not prepared for it either. They weren't even thinking it. They might not even think that pregnancy was an option for you. So I think we got to be forgiving of other people's reaction and don't take a whole
Yes.
lot from it because
Hmm.
everybody's
Yeah.
human. We're all just living our little human lives over here.
Hmm.
And just because your mom's not excited for you initially doesn't mean she can't like 360 turn, because I've had friends
Yeah.
whose kids have had unplanned pregnancies, and man, they love those grandbabies so much. So
Yeah.
don't think that that's going to be your reaction forever, or if your reaction is going to extend to your
Mhm.
pregnancy journey, it doesn't mean that. Because I think, I don't know if people listening are people of faith or people of like God's plan or just like
Mhm.
life plans in general. But I think a large part of the reason we're pregnant for so long is to give our minds time to wrap around the
Mhm.
fact that we're going to have a baby, to prepare for the baby, to prepare a relationship in our home. And obviously the baby has to grow inside and all those different kinds of things. But sometimes when I hear about animals that have like a 6-week gestation, I'm like, "Oh, I'm glad we had more time than that to really
Yes.
wrap my mind around this. I'm glad I didn't have
Mhm.
40 kittens," right?
Yeah. 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 I think that's a great point. I think I always tell clients you can't control how someone reacts, but you can take control how you process it and kind of what you accept into your own world, basically. And remember, if this is a shock to you, it might be a shock to other people too. And people say stupid things. That is the reality. When I remember just early on in pregnancy, when people were saying things to me, I'm like, oh, this is accurate. People actually say the stupidest things to you when you're pregnant and postpartum and as you're, you know, being a parent. It's just something that happens and I don't know, it shifts. And I think people have really good intentions and they just want to be helpful, but it's not always helpful. So that's kind of on our end to set boundaries, but also be able to kind of process some of that.
And allow grace for that
Yes.
initial reaction, because
Hmm.
as unexpected as it is for you, it may be 3 times more unexpected for them.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to grief though, I think it's so valid to grieve your pre-pregnancy life, your pre-pregnancy body, your
Hmm.
life before you had to have all these different thoughts, because
Yeah.
before you got pregnant, you got to think about like, what am I going to wear? Where am I going to party at this weekend? And then all of a sudden, this baby is coming, car seats, strollers, prenatal appointments, prenatal vitamins, trying to keep them down, trying not to throw up. What do people say about all that?
Yeah. I think first, like grief is a natural response to change. And an unexpected pregnancy is a huge change. So there's a couple different types of grief that we see often with unexpected pregnancy. So ambiguous loss is the kind of loss that feels very unclear or unresolved. It's just like this emotional pain that comes when there's really not a lot of closure. Maybe you're grieving something that doesn't really have a name to it, or maybe it's something no one's going to acknowledge as a loss. So that could look like grieving the version of your life you thought you'd have in this season, the plans and timeline you had in place. I've had clients who found out they're pregnant and they had these plans this weekend to do something that you can't do while you're pregnant. That's okay to grieve that. Like that's a sudden change for you. You might be grieving the emotional or practical support that you'd expected from your village and you didn't receive it. You might be grieving your freedom or flexibility or the identity you had before this moment. I mean, we talk about at She Might that we don't believe in the false dichotomy that you can have either your career or something or a child. We believe you can be a great mom and you can have those things if that's what you desire and that's what you want to pursue. And so, yes, it takes sacrifice. We know your timeline might adjust, but there's grief in that. There's grief in processing that. And then I think when we think of your like pregnancies have unexpected things happen all the time. We talked about this a little bit before that maybe you turned out to be high risk and you didn't expect that. And you're grieving what you thought your pregnancy or your delivery would look like. And so when we're talking about ambiguous loss, we're also talking about disenfranchised grief. So, like I said, ambiguous loss is kind of that loss without clarity. And then disenfranchised grief is the kind of mourning and grief that society is not really recognizing or validating. So you might feel that because people are like, well, how did you get pregnant? I mean, you know how you got pregnant, right? Like, there's no such thing as an unexpected pregnancy. That's what a lot of people can say. But you might feel that like sadness that's really hard to explain, but is real. And it's dismissed by people in your life or just dismissed by kind of society. So I think that could look like grieving something that's very intangible, like your future that suddenly looks very different for you. You can still achieve those things, but your timeline looks different. Or, like I said before, maybe your partner you thought would respond in a certain way and they didn't. And so that's impacting how you feel about yourself, how you feel about this pregnancy, and how you feel about your partner. And then, like I said, just kind of what your family looks like. I think these could not seem like losses to other people, but they're real to you. They're still heavy and they matter to you. So I think it makes it really hard to process that when you feel like nobody else is seeing me, nobody else is feeling what I'm feeling. And it can really make you feel isolated. So I encourage clients and, members of our community to lean into that and process what they're feeling. Even if it feels silly, it's real to you, and it's valid for you to process that. So at the end of the day, you can find community, seek out support from, mental health professionals, find a support group, join a community and find people who will be able to kind of sit with you in that.
I was thinking that we probably don't share this much on social media because ultimately I probably wouldn't want my kids to know that I was super excited that they were coming.
Yeah.
I think it's more okay to say postpartum's horrible because everyone's understands you're not sleeping, right?
Yes.
So it's not the baby that you didn't want,
Mhm.
it's the after effects versus when you're like, I'm pregnant and I'm not jazzed about it.
Yeah.
Ultimately is kind of like, not jazzed
Mhm.
about you.
Yeah.
And so
So
that's
true.
probably why we don't see people talking about it on social media. And I think that that's valid. That's
Yeah.
probably not something that I held for the time in all eternity for my kids to know those kind of things. Sometimes I see pregnancy announcements where people are just devastated and they filmed it on TikTok. And I'm always
Yeah.
like, oh, that's kind of a lot for your kid later on.
Yes.
But that's such a valid feeling, right?
Mhm.
So if you want to film a TikTok, I'm here to watch it for you. But at the same point, I totally understand why it's not something that you want to go shout from the rooftops.
Yeah.
But I bet if you bring it up to your mom community, your friend community, especially people who've had babies before, you're
Mhm.
going to hear a lot of, oh, me too, because it's something that a lot of people feel, but we don't want in the annals of time.
Yeah. And I think there's just unexpected things with pregnancy. I don't like being pregnant. I had very difficult pregnancies. And so I wasn't joyful and happy. And I have friends who experience similar things. And I'm like, it's okay to not like being pregnant. That doesn't make you a bad person. It's really hard. It is really hard to be pregnant. You're growing a person, it's taking all of you basically to do this while you're also doing your other things. And so it's valid to not be totally having this unicorn pregnancy where you're like, I'm just glowing and all of this. And so I think part of that comes into that of grieving what you thought pregnancy would be like for you and what you had hoped you'd feel about it. That doesn't mean you're a bad person and you're not going to be an amazing mom. It just means that this is really hard.
I would guess there's absolutely no correlation towards at a 5-year-old, because we're looking at kids when they have memories and they care about things. A 5-year-old mom versus comparing them to people who were excited about their pregnancy or loved their pregnancy versus people who didn't. I bet there is no correlation between the two, except for obviously socioeconomic issues or things like that. So I know there were so many things that I was worried that my pregnancy would affect me moving forward, and ultimately absolutely didn't. I made way worse choices as a mom with teenagers than I did with those. So okay, so I wanted to talk about what are some other areas that you notice people getting sort of caught off guard by the grief or stuff as they move forward through pregnancy and ultimately having the baby.
Yeah. I mean, I think after you come to terms with this is happening, this is my life right now, I think things can still shift in unexpected ways. And we've talked about this a little bit. You could be told that you're high risk or that there's some kind of complication, even if you're a healthy person. Or you might experience a pregnancy filled with every single symptom imaginable. I had a friend that this happened to, and all I could just hope for her is that man, I just want your birth to be so much easier than what your pregnancy has been, because I'm just sometimes people get every symptom imaginable, and it can seem like at every appointment brings a new surprise, and that those surprises are considered quote unquote normal for pregnancy. I just saw something you had posted about that of feeling like you're just being told everything's normal. Well, how do you actually process that and figure out how to make it better for yourself too? Because obviously our doctors can't solve all of our problems. That's the reality of pregnancy. And so I think when you're experiencing unexpected things during pregnancy, you're high risk, you have things that you didn't expect to happen, that can still kind of catch you off guard. There's just a lot of emotional ups and downs with that. I experienced that with my first pregnancy, that it seemed like everything was going wrong with it. And so it was hard to imagine that things weren't going to keep going wrong. And then,
I think during pregnancy, it's the first time a lot of people are managing healthcare in general because you've been a young, healthy person up until this point, and now all of a sudden, because pregnancy sort of ages your body up like 20 to 30 years just because of
mhm,
all the strain on it. And so suddenly you're looking at healthcare like a 60-year-old versus a
yes.
30-year-old. And so it changes things night and day. And I'm here to tell you that, after pregnancy, most often you again are a healthy young person, but
Mhm.
healthcare can be a lot during pregnancy
Yes.
that you weren't prepared for.
Mhm. Super overwhelming. People don't expect bills to come in. I remember I thought, oh, yeah, like I'll probably just have to pay my deductible. And no, I had to pay a certain amount for my prenatal visits. And I didn't expect that. If you're not told, you're not going to know. And if you don't do the research. So that was unexpected for me. I think relationships can be unexpected. People will continue to have responses for things that you don't expect. Maybe this surprise you in a positive way, but sometimes it's a negative thing. And so it's just kind of processing that, figuring out what your relationships look like. Relationships change as you become a mom. I was one of the first people to become a mom in my friend group. And so my kids have a lot of incredible aunts, but that was kind of an interesting transition of like what priorities shift. And you're going to see that. And so that's, I think, unexpected for people. And then, when you get to the point where you're having your baby, your delivery, there are things that will probably come up that are unexpected for you. You haven't experienced this before. And so that's really hard. And then some things come up and you could have a traumatic delivery or a bad experience that you have to process and heal from. I think we talked about it a little when we were on the She Might podcast, that feeling like you're not bonding with your baby right away, or you don't like immediately like feel that. And that's kind of the expected thing. And I think there are just so many things that come up in postpartum that we think, oh, like we have this newborn bubble and it's just going to be wonderful. It can be really hard. It is really hard. Even if you're having the best experience, it's still hard because you're learning how to take care of another human, and you're taking care of your baby and navigating feeding and health and healing yourself after a long 9 months of pregnancy.
It is a lot to take in. And I think the trap we get stuck in with these unplanned pregnancies is thinking that everyone else is feeling something different than you. They all immediately bonded with their baby, but because this was an unplanned pregnancy, I didn't feel that rush of love, right, as they put
Hmm.
baby on my chest. And I'm here to tell you that there is a wide variety of feelings no matter how you got pregnant. If it was
Yes.
an intended syringe pregnancy or an IVF, right?
Hmm.
Where maybe it's your sixth cycle and you're just about ready to give up. All of these things have unplanned emotions about them, and
Hmm.
everybody feels a different way. And I'm also here to tell you that as a nurse who sees people give birth in the labor room, when people call their sister an hour later with their birth story, and I'm like cleaning up the placenta and all this different kind of stuff, when they tell the story, I'm like, well, that is not how that happened at all. They'll be like, oh, it was like absolutely, it was like no pain at all. And I'm like, girl, you were pulling my hand off, screaming an hour ago. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, because we're all just getting it filtered through people's brains
Hmm.
after the time has gone. Most people don't get to see, that baby put right to chest or
Yeah.
whatever. But as somebody who's seen it thousands of times, I'm telling you, there are thousands of different ways to feel of your baby during pregnancy, after delivery, 5 years down the road.
Yeah. Well, and it's incredible how our brain says, like, oh, we'll turn that piece off. And that's why we have more kids. It's because we forget about those really hard things. And like, you get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm sleeping again. We can have another. And so it's just, yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. I think you're going to grieve different pieces of your pregnancy experience, or just have to process those things in those moments where it doesn't feel joyful. It doesn't feel like this is what you dreamed of, or you're confused or fearful of something. Or sometimes it comes out that it brings up some past trauma or some stress that you're experiencing. And I think that's okay to have. And that's why there are supports out there. That's where there are mental health professionals that specifically work with pregnant and postpartum women. And that's why, there are communities out there so that you can put it online and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Does anyone feel the same? And feel like, oh, I'm not alone in this. Like, I would say every single post that I see in our community, there's at least one person that says, oh no, I felt that way too. Like it's normal. I mean, still need that support, but it's normal. Like you're not a bad person for feeling that way or having that emotion.
Another thing you had mentioned is to, some people have a positive reaction when you have your baby.
Mhm.
They're so excited for you versus and we're always going to glom on to the people that had the negative reaction, right? That's what
Mhm.
our brain is going to fixate on.
Yeah.
Oh, she wasn't happy for me, blah, blah, blah. But as a mom, the more we can get and like noticing when we have those positive things, because as a new mom, I was like, I hate a lot of this, right? But, all of a
Yep.
sudden we'd be dragging the wagon to the bookmobile. And I remember thinking, this is what I always dreamed motherhood would be like, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, I have got to savor this moment because I didn't think
Yeah.
it would be smelling like spit up. I didn't think that it would be so sleepless, so much
Mhm.
crying from both the baby and me. And so noticing those positive times
Yeah.
can be super, super helpful. And of course, that's what
Mhm.
people share on social media
Mhm.
is them having that time where like, this is what I always thought it was going to be.
Yes.
And that's one social media image in a
Mhm.
lifetime of, man, this is way different and worse
Mhm.
than what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think we hear that a lot, and I always tell people to try to, like, remember back to before you were pregnant. What are things that, like, brought you joy in those moments? If this current moment is not bringing you joy and, like, a little bit of lightness, what are some things you can try? For me, that was making sure that I was getting outside and going on walks, especially with my first, because I had pretty significant postpartum anxiety that I wasn't acknowledging at the time, even though I work in this, and it took me probably a couple years to really acknowledge how deeply I was struggling. And so I think just remember those things that actually helped in the past and try it. It never hurts to try it. It could not work, and then you have to find something else. But yeah, my daughter is 1 in 9 days, and I'm in the space of like, oh my gosh, that really did go by like fast, way faster than the first. I think it's because when you have a toddler and a baby, there's like a million things happening. But man, I'm looking back to this year and like remembering like, okay, this is crazy how fast this went. And so it really is true. Like I think you're right. Like trying to find those positive things, even taking one good win from the day or one positive thing that happened, even if that's something that seems silly, like, oh, I actually, put the dishes away today from the dishwasher, or I got outside, or I got dressed, took a shower, read a book. Like anything is a win in my book during that season. So take the steps to try to find those little things. And I think that can help you process those hard moments.
I think that's true. And I think a lot of times people are like, well, I can't take the baby. I love to go on a walk, but I can't take the baby. And I'm here to tell you that there is a lot that you can haul your baby with you, especially a walk. I mean,
Yeah.
walks, babies love walks. So I'm here for
Hmm.
that one. But if there's something that you loved before, unless it's like going to the ballet, probably don't want to take your baby to that. There's a lot that you can bring your baby to. Let's say
Hmm.
you loved going to the library, take your baby to the
Yeah.
infant thing at the library. There's so many things that you can bring your baby to, even though it's going to feel overwhelming, give it a shot because you sort of have to learn how to like manage doing things with your baby, but there's a
Yeah.
lot you can do with your baby.
Yeah. And I think learning how to best communicate, we have some really good communication tips that we have on our website, like as a resource, but like it's all in how you communicate because sometimes you may have a need and you're not communicating it to get the response that you actually need. So I think being able to communicate well, and like I said, I can send that downloadable too, like learning how to say things and being specific about what you need in that season can help so that you're able to get that support and that time to just find those wins and kind of take care of yourself.
Especially from a partner,
Yep.
because the other thing is you've got this partner who's grieving their life, right? And
Hmm.
so both of you can be on a train to destruction
So
together.
true.
And so that gets extra tricky because it is definitely happening to both of you. And
Hmm.
so looking for outside supports, his mom, your mom, and allowing them to come help you out can be really helpful as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that village, like I totally see that all the time is that families aren't as nearby anymore. And so, yeah, that's why sometimes it's hard, but we have to seek out that village and that community. And there are a lot of great groups out there all across the United States that you can join. And you have to find what like fits you, fits your background, your values, your needs. But there are people out there and there are online communities out there, whether that's through social media or something like the She Might Discord community, that is kind of a start to building that village.
Yeah. So, what can people get from She Might? Tell us more about what you guys can offer to people if they have had an unplanned pregnancy or are just feeling the grief of like suddenly this seems more unplanned than I thought it was going to be.
Mhm.
What can they get from you guys?
Yeah, so She Might started as an online blog, basically. And so we have a resource library with over 150 articles and downloads that are just kind of to help you walk on your journey. So there's different resources on there from, pregnancy stuff to maternity leave. We're a go-to resource for maternity leave planning, and we would love to support in that. We do have a coaching program just to kind of support helping through that unexpected pregnancy. And yeah, we have our online Discord community. It's just kind of a space where you can engage with people kind of walking the same journey, share your experience, build connections, ask questions. So that's our online community. And we have a couple new things that we're launching soon. We'll be offering a grant program. Most of the women that we serve are above the poverty line. And so they're often not eligible for any government assistance. But we know that just because you're above the poverty line doesn't mean that you don't need some support and that one big expense can't really break things for you. And so we're offering a grant program coming soon to just kind of help make the early motherhood journey a little bit easier. And so that information will be out soon. But yeah, we're just a community on social media and Discord that just wants to kind of walk with people on their unexpected journeys.
I think that's so awesome. I'm going to put links for you guys in the show description or down below if you guys are watching on YouTube. But I'm so glad that we're starting to have this conversation so that people can understand that what they're feeling isn't unusual and they can look just like every other mom that they see at the playground. I think everyone envisions themselves as this person who just like Miss Hannigan from Annie, who's like little girls. And that's not going to be the case. Those feelings are not going to extend to every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And the more we talk about it, the less shame there is to it. I always tell clients, like, shame is the place you don't want to go. And so I think we can break the stigma around it and just talk about it and normalize that half of the pregnancies in the United States are unexpected. Like, people can feel like, oh, I'm actually not alone in this, and know that like people are out there to kind of walk with you. And there's more people out there that are experiencing this than you probably know.
Yes. And even beyond that, there's a lot of people who are like, oh my gosh, now I'm pregnant. Even if it was planned, they were off birth control. They were trying, they were IVFing it. They were spending thousands of dollars for this baby. You can still have a feeling like, oh my gosh, what have I done to myself?
I completely agree.
Okay, Erin, thank you so much for coming on. I hope this information is helpful for people. I hope people will reach out to She Might because I think that's such a valuable opportunity. And best of luck to you guys moving forward. I hope that this just grows and grows and people can learn that they're not alone.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I just think people need to understand how many people have these same feelings. And like I said before, we're not talking about them because it's not something we really want our kids to end up knowing later on, which I totally understand. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about it in private, even if we're not sharing it on social. So check out She Might. It sounds like they have so many good resources for you guys. I'm grateful that we have companies like them that can help us out. We'll see you next time on the Pulling Curls podcast. Thanks for joining us on the Pulling Curls podcast today. If you liked today's episode, please consider reviewing, sharing, subscribing. It really helps our podcast grow. Thank you.